Okay, number two. So we're going to look at solving equations now. So we've done really quick intro on what an equation is, and really could have linked that in with this video, but we'll keep them separate. We're going to start fresh. We're going to look at really how we're going to solve an equation. So what are our steps going to be? What are we kind of aiming for? What's the end goal? How are we going to get there? So when we're solving an equation, or when we're looking at equations, our goal is always to solve for the variable. Or you might hear, it might be written down, you're solving for what we call the unknown. So you're either solving for a variable or an unknown, which is the same thing. Okay, it's two words for the same thing. And what that means is that we want to get x is equal to something. Okay, so that's always going to be our end goal. We're going to write that on every question we do. We're just going to write that to kind of drill it into our heads. We always want to have x equals something, or whatever the letter is, whatever the variable is. If it's y, if it's z, if it's k, it doesn't matter. X is equal to whatever, or k is equal to, or y is equal to. And in order to do this, we want to isolate x. And that means get x on its own and remove anything else from that side of the equal sign. So we want to have just x on its own equal to something, not x plus 3, not x plus 7, not 2x, not 7x. We just want x on its own. And in order to do that, we'll have to use what we call inverse operations. So an inverse operation, inverse means kind of the opposite. Okay, if you invert something, you kind of turn it upside down, you turn it on its head, you're doing the opposite of it. So we have to look at our operations. Our four operations in maths we should know are adding and subtracting and multiplying and dividing, the four that we're going to focus on. So the inverse of adding, the opposite of adding, is subtracting. The opposite of subtracting is adding, kind of by the same idea. The opposite of multiplying is dividing, and similarly then the opposite of dividing is multiplying. So that's going to be really important for us in doing these questions. We have to be very clear on, if we see something being added on, what is the opposite of that? What's the inverse operation? So how do I kind of undo that? The other thing to remember is that both sides of an equal sign must remain balanced. This is what we looked at really quickly in the first video. Have to have this level of balance at all times. So they always have to stay balanced with each other. We can't be changing one side and not changing the other. So we're always going to keep it balanced. And the steps that I'm giving you here will help you just keep that pattern going and keep this method. It's really important when you're doing your questions, when you're doing your homework, when you're following the examples, that you're following the steps as well. So our steps that we're going to do is we're going to identify the variable. That's going to be the first thing. So we're going to look for, what is the variable? What letter am I trying to get on its own? We also then need to see what needs to be removed. What do we need to get rid of? Okay, what's on that side of the equal sign that we don't want to be there? Then we're going to do any adding or subtracting that we have to do. Now, what's interesting with this one, I suppose, is when we did our order of operations before, we would have had our brackets or indices and so on and so forth, and adding and subtracting would have been the last two. Because what we're doing here is kind of working backwards, we're kind of undoing anything that's happening to x just to get it on its own. Because of that, we're kind of going in the opposite direction. So we're working our way backwards in terms of our order of operations. But if you just remember, if there's anything added on or subtracted, you're going to get rid of that first. Then if there's anything in front of x, so if it's multiplied by something or divided by something equally, then we're going to deal with that then. So first we'll get rid of anything that's added or subtracted, then we'll multiply and divide if we need to. And for these examples, we're going to follow the steps. Okay, I'm going to drill this into you. We're going to follow the steps as best we can. With each example, we're going to write out what our steps are, and we're going to just lead our way through it that way, and then it'll just become second nature for us. So, and as I kind of said, with these ones, we're making sure that we know these steps so that we know them when we get to the harder ones. So it's not about getting the answer with these questions, it's about getting the steps. That's why this video is not on finding the answer to equations. It's a method for solving equations. It's a method, not just answer. So looking at this one, x plus 7 is equal to 16. So we have to identify our variable. So we're looking for x, obviously. So we want to get x on its own. So remember from the start, that's our goal. We want x is equal to something. So we can see there that what I'd like to get rid of would be this plus 7. Okay, we have x plus 7, but I don't want x plus 7. I just want x on its own. So if I'm rewriting my question, I want to undo that. I want to get rid of that plus 7. And to do that, I'm going to do the opposite of plus 7. So kind of looking back at our inverse operations, what's the opposite of adding? But it's subtracting. So if I want to get rid of that plus 7, if I want to do the opposite, I'm going to do minus 7. Okay, that's a bad 7. Minus 7. But if I do minus 7 from that side, if I take away 7 from this side, suddenly not balanced. Okay, this side's gone down, this side hasn't moved at all. Okay, if it was a seesaw, we've gone like this. So we have to do the same to the other side. So we take away 7 from that side also. Now if we look at this part, plus 7 take away 7, or plus 7 minus 7, is just 0. So all that's left on my left-hand side is just my x. On my right-hand side, 16 minus 7, I just get 9. So my answer is that x is equal to 9. And that might be one that you'd be able to spot from the question. You might have been able to look at it and just see that the answer was 9, and that's fine. Okay, but we're looking at these steps, we're following these through, we're giving ourselves the opportunity to get confident with the steps now. Looking at the next one then on the right hand side, 3x is equal to 12. Well again, we first of all look at our variable, so we're looking to get x on its own. We need to see what we need to remove, and this time what we need to remove is the 3. Okay, this brings us back to kind of our algebra. So if you need, again, it's all algebra. I suppose this is all related to algebra, but in terms of the first chapter of algebra that we did, and it's the idea that 3x is the same as 3 multiplied by x. Now we don't tend to write in that multiply sign because it just gets confusing, particularly with x's, and we don't need to. Okay, we defined that. We defined 3x as meaning 3 multiplied by x. Because we know that this operation now, what's happening here is that this x is being multiplied by 3, the first step that I can do, how am I going to get rid of the 3? What's the opposite of multiplying? It's dividing. So I'm going to divide by 3. Now if I divide that side by 3, I have to do the same thing to the other side. So I divide that side by 3 also. 3 divided by 3 is just 1, so I get 1x, or I can just write that as x. And 12 divided by 3 is 4. And I get that x is equal to 4. Okay, let's look at the next one. X minus 4 is equal to 12. So again, look for what am I trying to get on its own? X. What do I need to get rid of? Minus 4. So let's have a look. X minus 4. What's the opposite of minus? What's the opposite of subtracting, or the opposite of taking away? Well, it's going to be adding. So I'll add on 4. Instead of taking away 4, I'll add 4. But I can't just do it to that one side, I must do it to the other side also. That's going to give me x on this side, and on the other side, 16. Next example here, 4x, I'm going to divide by 4, but I can't just divide that side by 4, I have to also divide the other side by 4, and here we have to be careful of our signs as well. So I get x is equal to minus 7, because a minus divided by a plus, a negative number divided by a positive number gives me a negative number, gives me minus 7. Looking at the next part, 3x minus 5 is equal to 16. So these examples here are bringing in parts from both of the sections that we've done. So we looked at removing something that's added on, and we also looked at removing something that's multiplied. So for these questions, we need to bring in those two ideas together. And I said to you when we were going through the steps, the first thing we're going to do is get rid of anything that's added or subtracted. Then we look at multiplying or dividing. So first of all, we'll focus on what's added or subtracted. First step, as always, identify what we're looking for. We want to get x. My end goal for all of these questions should be x is equal to something, and not 3x, not 4x, just one singular x on its own. What I need to start by getting rid of is the minus 5 here. That's what I want to get rid of first. So let's write my question. 3x minus 5 equals 16. Okay, what is the opposite of taking away 5? What is the opposite of subtracting 5? Well, the opposite of subtracting is adding, so I could add on 5. If I do that to one side, I must also do it to the other side. So I get 3x is equal to 21. Now at this point, we're kind of back to one of the earlier questions. I can see in front of my x there I have a 3, and we should know that that means that it's 3 multiplied by x. So to get rid of that, I need to do the opposite of multiplying, which is dividing, and that gives me x on this side and 7 on this side. So I get that x is equal to 7. If we wanted to check if our answer was correct, we could substitute back in, which we should remember from the previous section. So we could try substituting our answer back in, or subbing it back in, and we get 16 is equal to 16, which is correct. So that's a way of us just verifying our answer, just checking for ourselves. So let's apply the same idea now to the second example. The same idea again, we are looking for x. We want to get x on its own. What do I need to get rid of? the plus 2. So let's have a go. 4x plus 2. What's the opposite of adding 2? What's the opposite of plus 2? Well, it's minus 2 or negative 2. 14 minus 2. I get 4x equals 12. To get rid of this 4, I need to divide by 4, and I'll do the same on the other side. So I get x is equal to 3. Okay, so x is equal to 3 is my end result. We'll look at the last example then. Let me see, I'll just get rid of this line here and maybe add one in here. So let's look at this last example. Let's take this over. So again, same idea. We can see that there's a negative number, a minus number on the right hand side here. We maybe haven't seen that before, but it's okay. It's not going to change our answer. We can follow it through as normal. So let's have a look. 2x plus 4. I would like to get rid of that plus 4, so I'm going to have to do minus 4. That is equal to minus 4 minus 4. Oh, sorry, don't know why that's zoomed in there. Okay, so let's look at this now. Plus 4 take away 4 is obviously just going to give me 0, so I'll just have 2x on this side. Minus 4 minus 4. Okay, or negative 4, whatever you want to call it. Okay, if I take away 4 and I take away 4 more, that means I have altogether a minus 8, a negative 8, or I've taken away 8. Okay, looking at the next part then. So if I want to get rid of that 2 here, I need to divide this side by 2. But if I divide that one side by 2, I must do the same to the other side. So what that leaves me with is x is equal to a minus 8 divided by 2 is going to be minus 4. Okay, so we can see there, even though there was a minus in front of the number on the right hand side, it didn't change the steps that we're following. We're still going the exact same way. We're still following the exact same steps that we have from the start. So the key thing with all these questions is following these 4 steps that we've laid out. So identify what we're looking for, see what we need to remove, and then what are the steps that we need to do to remove that. So what do we need to add or subtract? What do we need to remove from the left hand side? How am I going to do it? What's the opposite of what I have? So for the plus 7 there, what was the opposite of plus 7? Well, it was minus 7 or subtracting 7. So we need to do that. If we do it to one side, we have to do it to the other side. Okay, that's the other thing to really, really get into your head. If we do something to one side, we must do it to the other side. So there's a good few examples for you to follow through there. So make sure that you're happy with the steps in all of them. If you need to go back and rewatch the video again or just jump to those specific points, follow through the example, make sure you're happy with all of those steps. Okay, because we're following the same steps with each one, and you need to be able to follow those steps in order to do these questions, and particularly then to do the harder questions that we're going to come to.